Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm going to be testing the Far Cry franchise on the GeForce GTX 1050 2GB. I'll be testing Far Cry 1, 2, 3, 4, Primal and Far Cry 5. I didn't test Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon because that one runs pretty much the same as Far Cry 3 and the video is already very long in my opinion. So yeah, just expect similar performance to Far Cry 3. So first of all, I'll show you Far Cry 1. And on this one I'll be using 4K maximum settings. It's a very old game, so it was to be expected, over 100 frames per second pretty much all the time. If you play at lower resolutions like 1080p, 1440p or something like that, you get higher frame rates, so that's why I just tested 4K. We're already way over 60 frames per second. I'll talk to you again on Far Cry 2.
You see that?
Take care. Mercenaries are trained to work together. If you alert one, they will bring others.
You're dead! Flush him out! You're wish you were dead.
Now I'm testing Far Cry 2. Once again I'm using 4K and I selected DirectX 10 because on DirectX 9 there are some problems with using all the CPU cores, so the game can easily drop below 60 frames per second. Maximum settings without anti-aliasing because it's MSAA, and the HDR option is not available at DirectX 10 for some reason. On DirectX 9 you can select it if you want, maybe it's just enabled by default, I don't know. And once again the game is pretty much over 60 frames per second all the time. There might be a moment or two where it drops below 60, maybe to 58, 57, when there's a big explosion going on very close to you, but most of the time it's over 60, so if you play once again at 1440p or 1080p, the game will be over 60 frames per second anyway. So this is just to show you pretty much the worst case scenario, and I'll talk to you again on Far Cry 3.
Hola, got your ink?
Who are you? You're not a girl. My god, you are sick. Malaria. I have to get out of here, but I can help you get some medicine. Come find me at Mike's bar later.
Muy bien.
Now I'm testing Far Cry 3, and on this one I'm using 1080p because this is when the Far Cry games started being more demanding. I'm using DirectX 11, MSAA off, Alpha to coverage turn off as well because it doesn't make much of a visual difference that I can easily see. And on the SSAO method, which is the ambient occlusion method, I'm using HBAO. This game doesn't run that well, and in order to maintain over 60 frames per second the majority of the time, by just lowering post effects and geometry from ultra to high, the game tends to be much more stable. The rest is just maxed out. Only those two options were lowered in order to get more consistent frame rates. So across the whole gameplay is over 60 frames per second, but there are some times in the game where it can drop below that target, which is unfortunate because this game still looks very good and it should perform better. Usually one of the cores is maxed out, which is a bummer, but at least the part that I tested, there were a ton of enemies on screen, there were a lot of explosions, a lot of fire, a lot of grass, trees, all that kind of stuff. That's usually what hits performance, but some specific parts of the map can still drop below 60, so be aware of that. This game doesn't run perfectly well, but most of the time it should be fine. I'll talk to you again on Far Cry 4.
We'll be there in half a minute. We are coming in from the west. Run! Let me show you how a man fights. I'm coming for you! Good, motherfucker! We are coming in from the north. Oh my God! Here comes the boom! Fuck me! Where's that? Fuck me! You're mine, shithead! Let's see what you got, pussy! I got a bullet with your name.
Now I'm testing Far Cry 4 and I'll show you both 1080p and 900p targeting 60 frames per second. On 1080p I'm using pretty much high settings with terrain on medium, got where I start enough, and on the anti-aliasing option I'm using SMAA, and so far it was between 50 and 60 frames per second. In my opinion it's still completely playable, the game looks very good and the controls feel very responsive. Then when I lowered to 900p I used a mix between high and ultra settings with terrain on medium once again, and the game was a little smoother. I was usually between 50 and 60, but sometimes it can drop into the upper 40s when there's a lot of foliage on screen. That's the minority of the time, so I still consider it smooth enough. But just like Far Cry 3, there are some moments where the CPU usage is not 100% correct. It tends to max out a single core in some instances, but overall the game was completely playable. I'll talk to you again on Far Cry Primal.
Gunfire? You can't win! Bigger than Stop!
We'll be there in half a minute. We're coming up the road.
Killing you will be easy! Hey! You there! I need a minute! You are going to die here! Idiot! Enemies up there! Where? I don't see him! Enemy on sight! You
We're heading your way now. We're coming up the road.
Look out! Finish!
There's no hope for you!
Moving out!
Hurry!
Surrender and we'll kill you quickly! Kutte kamine! Cover me! Going up! I see the enemy! Get out of here!
Now I'm testing Far Cry Primal, and on this one once again I'll be testing 1080p and 900p. I show you two configurations for each resolution. First I'll try to be between 50 and 60 frames per second, which on 1080p means high settings, and then I just crank up the settings to the max to see what frame rate we get, just to show you how we can get close to 60 frames per second. And if you don't care about the frame rate, just crank it up to the max and we're still over 30 frames per second. And I'll talk to you again on Far Cry 5. And finally, Far Cry 5. On 1080p, unfortunately, we weren't able to maintain between 50 and 60 even at the lowest settings. I'll show you the highest settings, so I'm targeting over 30 frames per second at that resolution. Then I'll switch to 720p, and by using pretty much high settings, you can be over 60 frames per second all the time. The game is significantly smoother. On 900p, unfortunately, it was very difficult to maintain 60s unless you go to the lowest settings, but sometimes it can drop into the 40s. This was just to show you how to get 60 frames per second, but usually the most demanding options in the options menu are shadows, geometry and vegetation. By just lowering those options, you're usually getting a massive boost in performance. But if you want a more in-depth video on Far Cry 5, just check the link down in the description. I made a 20-minute video talking about this game on this card, and it tested 900p, 1080p with different settings, even 1440p, so you can have an idea on how the game performs. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video. Thanks for watching and see you next time.
10-4.
Good to see you, girl.
If he says he wants to leave me...
I'm seeing the target. Fuck! Piggy's at the back! Hit the deck! I'm going over to help! You think you're gonna survive this? You don't have a chance, man! They're outside that building!
Peggy's a flooding...
They think we've kidnapped the defector, and they're gonna do everything in their power to save him. Our people are cornered. You gotta act fast.
Go one of ours! These can't You got it! I have eyes on the target. I'm gonna scrape these motherfuckers. Lost it. Tell me what to do. Retreat! Hey, that fire's getting worse!
If he says he wants to leave Eden's Gate, then we gotta try and help him.
Pagers are trying to take him back. We gotta stop him.
It's a beautiful day for scraping.
Come on, we gotta protect the guy.
Fuck! Peggy's at the